Get started. So the talk today is native bees of the Northeastern United States. And good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me for our look today at some of these native bees. As Nora said, I'm Angie Hartley. I'm a Hardy Plant Society member and a Master Gardener in Harrisburg, soon to be Master Gardener on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. I'm moving to Salisbury in 3 weeks, so I'm going to be establishing a new garden there, and it will be from scratch, so we'll see what happens. Just about the presentation today, I wanted to note that even though I am a Master Gardener, in its current format, this talk is strictly my own. It's not endorsed by the Master Gardeners. It's my presentation. So we have 3 learning objectives for this morning. My goal is that after this presentation, you'll be able to understand current initiatives to identify and track bee populations. You'll be able to identify some of the native bees common to the region, their unique characteristics, and their conservation status. And you'll understand why native bees are important, why they're in danger, and how you can protect them. Based on this goal, the presentation includes 3 parts. First, I'll provide a brief description of the work of the Lopez Uribe Lab at Penn State, which is a comprehensive resource for information on bees. You can find many educational materials on the lab's website, and the link is provided in the handout. Next, I'll cover some examples of native bees categorized by bee family that you may find in your own garden. And finally, I'll explain the importance and current conservation status of native bees in the United States and our region, and provide one multi-pronged strategy that you can use to help native bees on your property. I also hope that you enjoy this talk and it inspires you to go outside and look for the bees we discuss. It's important to note that this presentation is not meant to be a comprehensive description of every native bee in the area. Obviously, that would be impossible. Instead, I want to show some species that are easy to identify and are likely to be seen in our gardens in the Mid-Atlantic region. I can be sure of this because all the bee photos you'll see are from my garden in Harrisburg, except for a few that are noted. I started my gardens in 2021 and I started tracking insects in the spring of 2024. I always took photos of plants, and in the past, if any insects happened to be in the photo, that was okay. But beginning in 2024, I focused much more closely on the insects than the flowers. And that summer, I had huge success. I suspect I saw so many different bees and wasps and flies because of the weather. It was incredibly hot and dry beginning in early May. In fact, it was the hottest year on record. This gave many species of native bees the opportunity to have 2 broods instead of just one. In the fall of 2023, we started to leave the leaves, and I also noted a big increase in hairstreak red admiral and American lady butterflies. To date, I've documented 242 species of insect, including 60 species of bees on my property. I refer to Pennsylvania throughout the talk, but the species I discuss here are found throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. This presentation is very visual, so if you can, set your monitor to full screen and enjoy. So first, let's get in the mood to look at bees. I'd like to start us off with a very brief video from a filmmaker from Pittsburgh named Michael Pisano. This video just really makes me happy. I smile every time I see it, and I hope you agree. And it's very appropriate for our talk because nearly all of the bees shown will be discussed later. Michael took a lot of this footage in his own backyard. Watch closely to see if you recognize any of the bees shown. begin our discussion with examples of research efforts to monitor bee populations. These efforts are essential to ensure the health and ongoing survival of bees in the context of climate change and loss of habitat. The Lopez Uribe Lab is a research group at the Pennsylvania State University that's focused on bee health and ecology, primarily the effect of environmental changes on bee populations. In addition to monitoring native bee species across Pennsylvania and promoting bee conservation through outreach programs, their research includes the evolution of pollinators, beekeeping management, and bee diseases. Ongoing research includes monitoring programs to collect data on bee distribution and abundance. The first of these programs is the Pennsylvania Bee Monitoring Program, an educational program for master gardeners to leverage their knowledge and interest in pollinator natural history and to create the first long-term bee monitoring program in the state. Master gardeners learn how to trap, collect, and process bee specimens. In this photo, Master Gardener Tony Shaw was setting up traps in the summer of 2024 at my house. Unfortunately, he only got some honeybees and some flies. The second is the Pennsylvania Bee Monitoring Project, of which I'm a member. This project is hosted on the iNaturalist platform. iNat observers upload photographic observations of bees in the state that are collected and tabulated by species, observer, and identifier. As of December, the project includes more than 62,000 observations of 218 different species. I'm proud to say that I'm ranked number 3 in the project among more than 10,000 observers for a number of different species observed. And the crazy thing about it is I observed all but one of these species on my property. Some observers travel across the state, visit large public gardens, and have nearly 10 times more total observations than I do. In 2020, the Lopez Uribe Lab published a checklist of the bees of Pennsylvania. The comprehensive checklist provides baseline data regarding the bee communities in the state, and the numbers shown here are similar throughout our region. These data are necessary to detect changes in ranges and populations over time, changes related to weather, climate, and seasonality, and how bees interact with each other and the non-living environment. These data also help to determine conservation needs. Since the checklist was published, a few more species have been recorded. The checklist includes information and species lists for each of the 6 bee families recorded in Pennsylvania. Our discussion today will include the 5 bee families with the most recorded species. To date, I have not documented any bees in the 6th family, the Melitidae. These bees are rarely observed or collected. Of note, there are 7 bee families in total, and the 7th is Stenotrididae. It's the smallest of the 7 bee families with only 21 species that occur only in Australia. I compiled this table to show the estimated numbers of bees relevant to the members of HPS Mid-Atlantic. While these numbers provide a general overview, it's important to remember that they also may represent more robust tracking efforts in some areas. We can't know if a certain species is found in a particular area until someone identifies it and documents it. In the Mid-Atlantic region, more than 500 species of native bees have been documented. Put that in comparison with more than 200,000 species of bees worldwide, with many species yet to be discovered. Before we move on to the individual species in each of the families, I wanted to briefly explain some terms that you'll hear me use today related to how bees carry pollen, what type of pollen they collect, how they live together or alone, and their bee parasites. But first we'll be collecting and carrying pollen. The anatomy and behaviors associated with pollen collection in bees are more intricate and complex than I can describe here. For example, some bees have special hairs on the fronts of their heads to aid in pollen collection, but in general, bees collect and transport pollen in one of 3 ways: scopa, corbicula, or crop. Only female bees collect pollen. The scopa, or the scopy plural, is an area of branched hairs that's denser than the hair on the other areas of the bee's body. Bees push pollen into the scopa for transport back to the nest after they groom it from other parts of their bodies. A scopa can be on the abdomen, as in the family Megachilidae, and that's in the upper left of the photo, or it can be, in most cases, on the hind legs in the upper right portion of the photo. You might hear the scopa referred to as the pollen broom. A corbicula or corbiculae, plural, refers to the shape of the pollen-carrying area. Corbiculae are most typically found on the hind legs of social bees, such as honeybees on the bottom left and bumblebees, bottom right. They're concave areas ringed with unbranched hairs that make the sides of the basket. After the bee grooms pollen grains from her body, she packs the pollen tight in the space between the tibia and tarsus. This space is called the bee's knees. Often she adds nectar to help the pollen stick together and then places the compressed pollen in the corbicula. And you might hear the corbicula referred to as the pollen basket. Here you can see the scopa on a female longhorn bee, the scopa on a female leaf-cutting bee, and the corbicula on the common eastern bumblebee. Finally, all bees in the genus Hylaeus, or mast bees, carry pollen internally in their crops or modified stomachs. These crops are sometimes referred to as the honey sac. They don't have scopae or corbiculae. These bees ingest the pollen directly from flowers, mix it with nectar, and regurgitate the liquid into their pre-made nest cells, which are lined with a cellophane-like substance. I'll also be mentioning generalist and specialist pollinators throughout the presentation. Pollen generalists carry pollen from a wide range of plants, but specialists primarily collect pollen from a specific plant family or genus. However, specialists do collect nectar from other flowers. In Pennsylvania, among the non-parasitic species, approximately 45% of bee species are pollen specialists. Because they're so closely tied to the host plants they forage on, they tend to be active for a short period of time that coincides with the flowering of their host plants. Specialization is a species, not genus-dependent behavior. Some genera include both types. Some examples of specialists are squash, blueberry, and rose mallow bees. The pickerel weed short-faced bee shown here forages specifically on pickerel weed. You'll hear me mention social structure or social behavior, but what exactly does that mean? It simply means how bees live together or not and raise their young. The social structures of bees can range from living a solitary life to living in large, highly complex groups. We won't go over all the various structures, but I wanted you to see them on this list to show the complexity and wide variation that exists. And to add to this complexity, some bees, for example, some species of sweat bees, can change their social structure depending on factors like time of year, geographic location, altitude, and even available floral resources. The simplest and most common is the solitary structure, in which individual females build nests and raise young alone. More than 90% of all bees worldwide are solitary. The 14 species of bumblebees in Pennsylvania form colonies, but they're only active from the spring through the fall and are considered primitively eusocial because the queen overwinters in solitude and looks very similar to the workers. The most complex structure is highly eusocial, which includes all the characteristics listed on the slide. In Pennsylvania, only honeybees are highly eusocial. Eusocial bees, like eusocial wasps, are generally more defensive because they protect their nests. Solitary bees are usually not defensive, they rarely sting, and most males don't have stingers. Some bees are actually parasites of other bees. Cuckoo bees are called such because their life cycle is similar to that of cuckoo birds that lay their eggs in the nests of other host species. Cuckoo bees are nest parasites of other bees, and they are often members of the same family as their host species, but not always. We'll see both types in this presentation. 24% of the bees in Pennsylvania are parasitic. Cuckoo bees enter the nests of species that collect pollen. Because they don't collect pollen themselves, they don't have pollen carrying scopi or corbiculae, so they're hairless and they often resemble wasps. They can locate nests by smell or by following the host to the nest. The female cuckoo bee will lay eggs in cells provisioned by the host female and will sometimes eat the host's larvae. The larva of the parasite hatches and consumes the pollen ball left for the host larva. And then the parasite larva oftentimes kills and eats the host larva. So now we'll move on to some common bees in the region by family. The first family is Apidae. This is a very large family, and there are 118 species in this family in Pennsylvania. Only two are not native, the honeybee and the Asian shaggy digger bee. 5 species in the state are of conservation concern. Most are solitary or semi-social, but aside from that, the family has diverse characteristics, including a wide range of nesting habits. They can have one or more generations per year, and they are pollen generalists and specialists. Today we'll cover the bumble, longhorn, and digger bees. Genus Bombus, or the bumblebees, live in colonies that can have as many as 500 individuals, but there are generally far fewer. They nest in cavities, usually underground, forage on a wide variety of plants, and are important crop pollinators. Their appearance is usually very fuzzy and black with patches of yellow and orange. The color patterns on the abdomen are important for distinguishing species. My favorite bumblebee, Bombus fervidus, the golden northern bumblebee, is native to the North American continent. It has a yellow-colored abdomen and thorax, and I'm able to distinguish this bee by the black stripe between its wings. Bombus fervidus generally nests in grassy open areas, which include forests and along roadsides. Nests can be located above and below ground, but the latter is more common. I'm going to be throwing in some interesting tidbits about some of these bees, and here's one. This bee has complex behavioral traits that include a coordinated nest defense to ward off predators. Workers vary the method of attack with the nature of the insect intruder. If it's stingless or comparatively weak, like the honeybee, the intruder is simply seized and immediately stung to death. Bombus fervidus also defecates on intruders or attackers, and this method is used when the intruder possesses a strong fighting ability. Like many bumblebee species, Bombus fervidus is in decline and in need of our protection. Abundance declines have been observed across most of North America, and the most apparent threat is the loss of its preferred grassland and tallgrass habitats to agricultural intensification. It's currently classified as vulnerable by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. I feel very fortunate to have photographed this bee in 2021, 2023, and 2025. The next Apidae species is the perplexing bumblebee. Many species of bumblebee are common in our area, and these include the two-spotted, brown-belted, and common eastern. I chose to highlight the perplexing bumblebee because of its unique fuzzy gold appearance. I saw these bees for the first time in 2024. The perplexing bumblebee lives in colonies. Queens overwinter and establish new colonies in the spring. These mated females are called gynes. The species is noted to be widespread but not particularly abundant, and it's generally not found in heavily urban areas. Rather, they are frequent in forests, where the workers are commonly found on understory shrubs in early summer. They are generalist feeders with a wide range in the northeastern part of the United States. This figure shows the social structure and life cycle of bumblebees. A fertilized solitary queen, a gyne, hibernates over winter in leaf litter, the soil, holes in logs, or under stones, and emerges in the spring. She feeds, builds an initial nest, and lays eggs. Female workers emerge and take over foraging, and the queen creates more brood cells and lays more eggs. In late summer, if the bees have collected sufficient nectar and pollen, male bees emerge and a new queen is produced. By fall, the old queen dies along with the workers. Only the new queen survives and mates and then seeks out a sheltered spot to hibernate throughout the winter. Bumblebee nests can range from a few dozen bees to a few hundred. Given the many bumblebees I see, I'm surprised that I've never come across a nest. I look all the time. However, they may nest in our wooded area among the fallen trees and logs. The next native aphidy genus is Melisodes, or the longhorned bees. Pennsylvania has 16 species in this genus, but 129 have been described worldwide. Longhorned bees belong to the tribe Eucerini and have unusually long antennae, hence their name. Eucerini serve as essential pollinators for multi-million-dollar crop industries, including melons and squash. And these bees are irreplaceable pollinators of garden flowers, native wildflowers, and sunflower crops. Melisodes are robust, medium-sized bees with hairy heads and bodies. Females have prominent, bushy, pollen-collecting scopi on their back legs. Males have narrower bills than females. They don't have the scopi, and they usually have much longer antennae. They have a very large range from Canada to Argentina, and all members of the genus nest in the ground, often in groups called aggregations. The denticulate longhorn bee shown here, Melisodes denticulatus, is a stunning bee with blue eyes. It's a specialist of ironweed, which makes for beautiful photos. The scopal hairs on the female Melisodes denticulatus usually look white because ironweed pollen is white. Males have long reddish antennae. The clypeus, a shield-shaped area on the face of the male bees, is distinctive. It's a creamy white with a dark strip at the bottom and a jagged top edge. In addition, it's notable that the males as well as the females of this species have blue-gray eyes. Melisodes trinotis, or the dark-veined longhorn bee, is a robust bee with a thorax covered with light brown or rust-colored hairs. Males have green eyes, long antennae, and a yellow or pale clypeus. The male Melisodes trinotis often sleep in groups on sunflowers, to which the genus is attracted. Females have gray-blue eyes and thick scopal hairs on their hind legs. They typically appear on sunflowers with the scopi of their back legs heavily laden with yellow pollen. While these bees feed almost exclusively on sunflowers, I've also photographed the males on New England aster. I plant sunflowers every year for these bees. And here's a photo of the male on the left and the female. Here we see two other species of longhorn bees, the vigorous longhorn bee, Melisodes subellatus, and the common Melisodes bimaculatus, the two-spotted longhorn bee. The arrow on the slide is showing one of the two spots on the bee's abdomen, the tip of the abdomen. That's where they get their name, two-spotted. Although I have other favorites, I think that the lunate longhorn cuckoo bee is one of the most beautiful bees in my garden. Their abdomens look almost like striped velvet, and one of their identifying characteristics is the smiley face on the thorax. As mentioned earlier, nest parasites enter the nests of a host, and their larvae eat the provisions of the host's young. In this case, this is a case in which the parasite and host are members of the same family, Apidae. This is the host, the two-spotted longhorn bee. Interestingly, as I was reviewing images for this presentation, I realized that I took these photos immediately one after the other in the same area of the garden. I shot the lunatus, the parasite first, and then the longhorn, the host, second. Our next Apidae species is the orange-tipped wood digger bee. I think of these bees as busy and fast. It's hard to get a good shot of them. They're common in shrubby woodlands where they hover around flowers. They prefer long tube flowers like the Verbena bonariensis shown and lobelia. These bees are solitary, and a unique characteristic of the species is that they nest in wood, including stems, rotted wood, and sometimes bee hotels, rather than in the ground like the other members of the genus Anthophora. They're common in much of the United States and Canada. Here you can see a female wood digger performing buzz pollination. This is a male on penstemon. Only the females have the orange tip to the abdomen. And here's a female feeding on lobelia. And you can see her full scopa and her long tongue that's sticking out through the top of the flower. One way to tell that you're looking at the orange-tipped wood digger bee is that they commonly fly towards flowers with their tongues extended. The next family of bees is Halictidae, commonly known as sweat bees. The members of this family are the most diverse in terms of behavior and biological traits. They may appear wasp-like, nearly hairless, and are often metallic. The family includes plant generalists and specialists that eat nectar, pollen, and salts. This is why they're often attracted to human sweat. Let's look at the ligated and orange-legged furrow bees, the bicolor striped sweat bee, and the pure green sweat bee. In most cases, furrow bees are social ground nesting species with a hierarchical structure like bumblebees. As members of the sweat bee family, they're occasionally attracted to human sweat and will walk calmly on fingers and arms. The ligated furrow bee shown here in particular is abundant and frequent in human-modified landscapes in midsummer throughout the Americas and Canada. They make their nests in wood or soil that is level, well-drained, and free of vegetation. Their size is somewhat variable but smaller than a honeybee. Females have an enlarged cheek with a distinctive point on the bottom corner, which makes them appear big-headed. In general, they're easily identifiable. They can be black or brown with white hair bands on the abdomen. Here are some additional photos of the ligated furrow bee. This is one of the most common bees in my garden. This is a very interesting bee, the orange-legged furrow bee, or Halictus rubicundus. These bees are socially polymorphic, which means that bees within the species exhibit different social structures. This is most often dependent on climate, and they're solitary at higher elevations and social at lower elevations. The strictly solitary characteristic is expressed as a response to colder environments because the active season is not long enough to produce two broods. Often solitary and eusocial colonies appear simultaneously in the same population. These sweat bees are extensively studied for their variability in social behavior, which has contributed to our understanding of the evolution of social behavior. Halictus rubicundus has one of the widest natural distributions of any bee species. It occurs throughout the temperate regions of the northern hemisphere. They're thought to nest in southward-facing slopes because the slope maximizes heat absorption from the sun and makes the nest warmer. The nests with favorable slopes are thought to increase the foraging efficiency of the adults and to enhance the development of larvae by providing a stable thermal environment. The bicolor striped sweat bee is very abundant and widespread. They're easily identified because of their striking appearance: metallic green head and thorax with striped abdomen. You can tell the females from the males because the females have white and black stripes, but the males have yellow and black stripes. The bee shown here is a female. These bees are solitary and nest underground, and their range is the Midwest and Northeastern United States. Here are two examples of males with yellow and black stripes on their abdomens. The pure green sweat bee is solitary, lives in rotting logs, and has a flight period from April to September. Because of this long flight period, these bees may produce 3 generations per year, which is why they're often common throughout the summer. They're generalist pollinators with a range primarily in the eastern United States. Males and females of this species have been observed licking sweat from human skin, likely to obtain salt. Males and females are similarly colored metallic green, but interestingly, in Florida, this species is metallic blue. Many species of hoverfly are often misidentified as sweat bees. Here are some of my favorite shots of the pure green sweat bee. I often think that they look like tiny jewels in the garden. The next family of bees to discuss is Andrenidae, or the mining bees. 100 species occur in Pennsylvania, and only one of those is not native. All species in this family are solitary, make individual nests in the ground, and have one brood per year. Mining bees have a very early flight period, and most species are active in spring only. Many species in this family are plant specialists, including the spring beauty mining bee. Now we'll look at some bees in the genus Andrena. Many mining bees are very difficult to differentiate, and identification at the species level is hard, with the exception of the Dunning's minor. This bee has a shiny black abdomen and fluffy orange thorax, which makes it easily distinguished. Here are a few examples of the various mining bees that are found in our area. This is the Barber's mining bee, and compare this to the Hawthorn mining bee, and you can see how they look very similar. Here's another photo of the Dunning's miner. And this final species is the commodious miner bee, and I was very excited to shoot this bee because I am one of the very few observations of this bee on iNaturalist. Another type of cuckoo bee is the nomad bee, which behaves exactly like other cuckoo bees by parasitizing the nest of a host. Nomad bees in particular target mining bees. So this is an example where the cuckoo bee and the host bee are not in the same family. The species shown here, the imbricate cuckoo nomad bee, parasitizes the Dunning's minor and others. In the earlier cuckoo slide, I mentioned that the parasite can find a host's nest by scent or by following the host. In these photos, you can see how the nomad bee followed the Dunning's minor bee to her nest. I also saw the nomad bees hanging around the area where the mining bees were nesting, just waiting for an opportunity to slip inside. My favorite bee family, Megachilidae, includes leafcutters, mason bees, and resin bees. Some non-native megachilids are important in Pennsylvania and were brought here to pollinate crops. For example, the horn-faced and Taurus mason bees are important pollinators that emerge early in the spring to pollinate fruit trees. The alfalfa leaf-cutting bee is an important pollinator of many crops, including alfalfa, blueberries, borage, canola, carrots, cranberries, and melons. These bees are plentiful in my garden and they're fun to watch. The appearance of the members in this family varies, and they often have black, brown, or metallic coloration. All species in the family are solitary, although females of some species may nest close together. They make their nests in cavities in wood, twigs, or stems. They separate the cells in the nest with leaves or petals, mud, or plant resins. They can have one or two broods per year and are plant specialists and generalists. The distinguishing characteristic of this family is that their scopi are on the abdomen rather than the legs. The first of the three types of megachilid bees is the leaf-cutting bees. Wool carders are considered leaf-cutting bees, but instead of lining their nests with leaves, they line them with wool-like fibers that they comb from plants. You're likely to see them around lamb's ear and rose campion. I'm going to make an exception regarding wool carder bees because none of the three species found in Pennsylvania is native. However, I included photos because you're very likely to see two of these bees in your garden, and honestly, I really enjoy watching them. The two species that are common are the European and the oblong. This is a European wool carder female gathering wool for her nest. And this is a female oblong wool carder. The third species is the European small wool carder. It's an exotic bee first documented in Pennsylvania in 2020 in the bee checklist. My photos of this species date back to 2023. This is my favorite bee species and the one that got me started on identification. I have hundreds of photos of this bee. They occur but are not common in the region. I'm happy to have them in my garden. Leaf-cutting bees are members of the genus Megachile. There are 25 species of Megachile in Pennsylvania, 14 of which are not native. These bees are important native pollinators in North America. They nest in soil, holes in the ground, plant stems, and holes in man-made objects. Their nests are cigar-shaped and made from leaves or petals. Each cell has a ball or loaf of stored pollen and a single egg. Most leafcutters overwinter in nests and chew their way out in the spring. This means that most of their lives are actually spent in the nest. Leaf-cutting bees are found on all continents except Antarctica. They may have 2 generations per year under favorable conditions. Leafcutter bees are only active for about 4 to 6 weeks beginning in summer. They spend the rest of their lives inside their nesting chambers, eating, growing, spinning cocoons, overwintering, and finally developing into adults. The life cycle of leaf-cutting bees is quite different than that of the bumblebees. Leaf-cutting bees overwinter as dormant, mature larvae. Once temperatures warm to around 70 degrees, they begin metamorphosis from larva to adult bees. The development time from larva to adult is temperature dependent. As I was preparing this talk, I thought about how I saw leafcutters for most of the spring and summer of 2024. In Harrisburg, it was very hot and very dry beginning in May that year, and I suspect they may have emerged early because of the hot weather and then produced a second brood. In the entire summer of 2025, which started out very cool and wet, I saw far fewer leafcutters. After emergence, they spend several weeks mating, building nests, collecting food for their offspring, and laying eggs. Males always emerge first, about 2 to 4 days before the first female. Since mating occurs almost immediately after females emerge, it's common to see male bees waiting at the nest or patrolling the surrounding area. Males die shortly after mating. The female leafcutters can choose the sex of the eggs they lay. Typically, they lay eggs that will become females towards the back of the nest and males near the front. This behavior provides an extra layer of protection for the female eggs. Under suitable conditions, a female bee may finish 2 to 4 tunnels in her lifetime with a rough average of around 30 eggs. And in this photo, you can see a leaf encasing a pollen ball and a larvae. Here are a few of the leaf-cutting bees from my garden. The first is the patchwork leaf cutter. This is the flat-tailed leaf cutter, and you can identify these. The last segment on the abdomen is flat and it sort of slopes downward. This is the frugal leaf cutting bee. I only saw this bee once last summer, and it was just beautiful. And this little guy is a male frigid leaf cutter. He was just tiny. Megachilid bees, like bees in the other families we've discussed, have nest parasites. Bees in the genus Coleoxys are cuckoo bees in the same family as their hosts. These bees are often referred to as sharp tails because of the sharp tails of the females. They use their tails to deposit eggs in the host's nest. The cuckoo bee shown here, the Say's cuckoo leafcutter, parasitizes the flat-tailed leafcutter bee. These photos show a female and her sharp tail. This photo shows a male with his characteristic spike tail that is shaped like a crown. The second subcategory or type of megachilid bees is mason bees, and they're part of the genus Osmia. Three of the species are not native, and those are probably the most well-known: the Taurus, the horn-faced, and the blue mason bees. Osmia lignaria, commonly known as the orchard mason bee, is native. It's used for large-scale agricultural pollination of almonds in the western United States. Here in the eastern United States, it has been on the decline for decades, and it's not commonly seen. Mason bees nest in cavities and are well suited for bee hotels. Their flight period is early spring. Another native, the Georgia mason bee shown here, prefers plants in the family Asteraceae. In this photo, it's visiting Philadelphia fleabane. This plant grows as a weed in my garden, but I don't remove it because so many different bees seem to love it. Osmia bucephala, the buffle-headed mason bee, is shown here on penstemon. This bee is widespread but rarely abundant and flies slightly later in the spring than the other Osmia species. This is one of the largest Osmia in the region, and it's often mistaken for a bumblebee worker. It's a generalist pollinator, and females make their nests in cavities like other species in this genus. Females seem to prefer flowers in the pea family, and lupins are a good place to look for them. The oversized head of the female is often a quick giveaway. Males have a very long spur on their hind tibia that is occasionally visible and quite distinctive. The final category of megachilid bees is the resin bee. Like leafcutters, resin bees are members of the genus Megachile in the subgenus Calostomoides. Resin bees are distinctive because they do not use leaves to partition their nests. Instead, they use plant resin, and they sometimes include stones. This resin is pliable, but it hardens in the nest and becomes waterproof. For that reason, the egg chamber has a spout at the top that may allow for air exchange. The slender resin bee shown here, Megachile exilis, nests in pre-existing cavities and feeds on various plants. Megachile campanule is the bellflower resin bee. These solitary bees are native to eastern North America. The bellflower resin bee is a known host to multiple parasites, including the Stelis louisi, which we'll come to in just a minute. According to a study conducted in Toronto and published in 2013, this species is among the first to use synthetic materials for making nests, particularly a polyurethane-based exterior building sealant. Although synthetic materials may offer some protection from nest parasites, they also promote mold, which kills the brood because plastic inhibits the diffusion of moisture. Plastics could also be a detriment to brood survival. In other animals, many examples of how plastics inhibit essential functions, including mobility, foraging, and respiration, have been documented. This is the non-native sculptured resin bee, Megachile sculpturalis. Introduced from Japan and China in the 1990s, it's considered an invasive species. It's one of the largest bees in the United States, and the female is larger than the male. They're reported to be actively antagonistic with carpenter bees and will attempt to evict them from burrows or even kill them. It may also compete with other native bees, such as mason bees, for cavities. I included this bee even though it's not native because you're likely to see it. In 2024, they were abundant in my garden, less so in 2025. I can't help but like them. They're cooperative for photos, and they're beautiful bees. Another cuckoo bee in the Megachilidae family is the Louisiana painted dark bee, which predominantly targets other megachilid bees that line their nests with tree resin, for example, the Megachile alexis that we saw a few slides ago. I don't like to think of harm coming to any of my leafcutter bees or any bees in the garden. However, in this case, I'm happy to see the cuckoo bees. Their presence suggests that I have healthy populations of host bees. The final family is the family Coletidae. All bees in this family make a cellophane-like lining for waterproofing and protecting their nests. Cellophane around brood cells allows the pollen provision to be more liquid than the pollen loaf of other species. All species in the family are solitary. They are plant specialists and generalists, and they nest in burrows they dig in the ground, hollow twigs, or cavities in wood. Coletid bees have a wide range of colors and patterns with white or yellow markings on the face and other parts of the body. Hyleus is a large and diverse genus within the bee family Coletidae, known as the yellow-faced bees or masked bees. This genus is the only truly globally distributed coletid, and it occurs on all continents except Antarctica. Hyleus bees in general lack the elongated hairs on the hind legs that other bee genera use to carry pollen externally, because they carry pollen internally in their crops. This makes them look like wasps. However, because of their small size, they're often easily overlooked. Mask bees are difficult to identify to the species level, but some experts feel they can be reliably separated by the extent and pattern of yellow on their heads and bodies. Although it's not been confirmed, I believe these are the modest, modest masked bee, Hylaeus modestus. And here's another photo of the modest masked bee. And our final cuckoo is the cellophane cuckoo bee. All species in the genus Epiolus are nest parasites of Coletes bees and are called cellophane cuckoo bees. Unlike their host, they're members of the Apidae family. The two-banded cellophane cuckoo bee shown here particularly targets the broad-footed cellophane bees. Both bees are specialists on plants in the Physalis genus. Here are some photos of the male Coletes latotarsus that lived in my garden last summer. I felt bad for him. He spent all the early summer patrolling one ground cherry plant, and I never saw a female come into his territory. Doesn't mean she didn't, but I didn't see it. So now that we've seen many native bees common to our area, we'll talk about why they're so important. Bees perform the crucial task of pollinating food crops. I'm sure you've heard the statement, 1 of every 3 bites of food we eat exists because of animal pollinators. But did you also know that 75% of the world's flowering plants and about 35% of the world's food crops depend on animal pollinators to reproduce? Nearly 90% of wild plants depend on insect pollination, and more than 3,500 species of native bees help to increase crop yields. Insect pollination services add more than $34 billion in economic value to the U.S. agricultural crops annually. In some areas, wild bees already provide most of the pollination for some summer vegetable crops, and conserving wild bee populations is essential for sustaining agricultural production. Did you know that native bees are better pollinators than honeybees? For many people, the first pollinator that comes to mind is the honeybee, but in reality, native bees are more efficient and effective pollinators than honeybees. In other words, they visit more plants and they pollinate better. Honeybees tend to deposit pollen on the same plant they gather it from. Native bees are more likely to move pollen to and from multiple plants. In a recent study, researchers found that plants pollinated by native bees produced more diverse offspring, and the seeds of those plants were 2 to 5 times healthier than the seeds of the plants pollinated by honeybees. Native bees, including bumblebees and others, shake pollen loose from flowers by vibrating during buzz pollination. Buzz pollination improves the chance of successful pollination and can help produce more fruit, which is beneficial for farmers. So now for the bad news. Populations of pollinating insects are declining worldwide, and some species are at risk of extinction. In 2017, the Center for Biological Diversity conducted a systematic review of the status of all 4,000 plus North American and Hawaiian native bees. They found that among native bee species with sufficient data to assess, more than half are declining. Nearly 1 in 4 is imperiled at an increasing risk of extinction. For many of the species without sufficient population data, it's likely they're also declining or at risk of extinction. Additional research is urgently needed to protect them. This links back to our earlier slides and the importance of monitoring and conservation efforts. In particular, in our area of North America, bumblebees have experienced significant declines. In Pennsylvania alone, 5 bees in the Apidae family are of conservation concern. The rusty-patched bumblebee is endangered. The golden northern and the American bumblebee and the yellow-banded bumblebee are declining. The Macropus cuckoo bee is critically imperiled and is one of the rarest bees in North America. This bee was thought to be extinct until discovered in Nova Scotia, Canada in 2002. It has not been documented in Pennsylvania since 1911 and is listed as an endangered species in Connecticut and Canada. Native bees need our help. Population declines are caused by many factors. As humans develop more and more wild areas, native bees are displaced or destroyed. Along with development comes a lack of pollinator-friendly plantings. Grasslands can't support pollinating insects, and they're often accompanied by herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers that kill pollinators and exacerbate habitat loss. Non-native species not only outcompete natives for food and other resources, but they also introduce disease and parasites that native bees are not equipped to combat. Pesticides and other contaminants kill and/or affect the long-term health of pollinators, and pollinators are not evolving fast enough to keep up with climate change. How can we help? One way is by implementing the multiple steps required to obtain habitat or pollinator-friendly certification. By meeting the requirements of certification, gardeners create a vital pollinator habitat that lessens the stress on pollinators and helps support a healthy ecosystem for the community and the future. Taking the steps to obtain habitat certification helps to increase biodiversity, reduce water consumption, and improve natural and biological control of pests. Actual certification isn't necessary to support native bees. You may not currently have all the required plants in your garden, but you can add them over time to meet certification requirements. Every little bit helps. You also may not be interested in obtaining certification at all, but that doesn't matter. Just consider the steps for certification as strategies you can use to help make your garden a haven for native bees. Remember, it's implementing the steps towards certification, not the actual status, that's important. Those steps include the following. Provide food for adult insects and larvae. This step is heavily dependent on the use of native plants, shrubs, and trees. Try to ensure that plants are in bloom and providing food from early spring through fall. Provide a water source or multiple sources. This can be a bird bath, water station, or naturally occurring water from a pond or stream. Provide shelter and nesting sites. In particular, delay spring cleanup. It really works. Avoid invasive plants. They outcompete natives and are not preferred by native pollinators. Avoid pesticides. Pesticides kill pollinators as well as pest species. To reduce the need for pesticides, encourage predatory insects. Remember that the pollinator habitat is actually a food web, and healthy ecosystem will support predators that keep pest populations in check. I hope my talk today inspires you to look for native bees in your garden and to spread the word about how important and wonderful they are. The more we know, the more we can do to ensure that native bees are protected now and in the future. The end.
Wow and wow.
Thank you so much, everyone.